Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Shogun, and joining me again today is my friend Hermes for a discussion on morality and trying to sort of hammer out what morality is, and is it objective or subjective, and how does it work, etc. Which is a question that I'm always eager to talk about. I think it's really interesting and important. But before we get started, please do follow and subscribe to YouTube and BitChute and Podbean, where you can find over 200 episodes of the Roundtable Podcast on every different subject with all kinds of great guests. But most of all, make sure you join the Roundtable Discord server. You can certainly find us on Discord under the conspiracy or politics sections, or you can just Google Roundtable Discord and find us that way as well. So that being said, welcome Hermes. Thank you for joining me. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Great. So we were going to talk today about morality, but can you tell us what you said you're trying to hammer something out, or you're working on some kind of a problem, and we thought maybe talking about it or about this might help. So you want to just introduce what you've been thinking about in this regard?
Yeah, sure. First of all, before I go to the problem, I would just like to introduce the whole concept, because the problem is still something that I don't have a good answer to. I have some inferences as to why it may or may not be true. But yeah, let me go on what I mean by morality. So I think, at least the way I understand morality, the way it works is really just a system of priority. Like, it's just like a computer. There is a priority system by which you attribute value to things. I believe that is really the what morality is. And in addition, one way of going about morality is if you have a goal. So let's just say you're going with the school of consequentialism. Right, so let's say you have a goal of better standard of life or something like that. Doesn't matter. Once you have a goal, it's no longer really an opinion which path is most efficient towards it, or which one is more good, which one is more moral or fitting towards finding the goal. Therefore, it's really just really programming. That's all morals is. It's programming that we have inherited from our biology. But there's a lot more to it that I would like to get into. But yeah, this is just the beginning intro. What do you think about it?
Yes, I think that's great. There's so many aspects we can dig into with morality, but I think you should just get us started by, giving us your current take on what you think morality is, right? It's just a basic question. Because some people don't really believe it exists at all, or they believe it's just a strictly cultural preference. Like, it essentially doesn't mean anything more than whether you like to wear red shirts or blue shirts. There's really no right or wrong. It's just determined by what's established by the people around you. And then other people think it's absolute, it's from God, it's eternal, or whatever, right? So where are you sitting with that now, at least as like your current working hypothesis?
So, morality, first of all, is definitely a real thing. It's a system of priority. We like or dislike certain things. We attribute value to things. We think something is good or something is bad according to our programming. So, it definitely does exist. There's also definitely variation between people. We can observe this. People have different types of morality, different types of values. Those values, a goal really for me was to find a common pattern. So what is life? How does life work? What is the whole story? It really is just preservation of information through replication. That's what life is. And it mutates through the process of replication, which then leads to certain types of mutations, which leads to certain traits. And depending on the efficacy of those traits, some of them might be passed on, some of them might not be passed on, and so on. It's just selection. But the idea still is that continuity or preservation of information is the prime, you could say, directive of all life. And if that is the case, then perhaps continuity is really truly all of our prime directives. It's like that's the core prime directive of all of us is continuity. And there's a couple of reasons why I lean towards that inference. So one, if you do not continue to exist, you cannot have anything else. It literally is the ultimate prerequisite for everything else. So maximizing continuity maximizes all other probabilities, basically. It allows all other possible realities to happen. Without continuity, you can't have anything. So I think continuity is unique in that sense. And even more is if you actually do prioritize continuity, a lot of things make sense, like what to do in terms of society and what our future is, and a bunch of other stuff. For example, we do know that there's a good chance of extinction level events, or ELEs, to happen on planet Earth. And with that, information in mind, we have to realize that basically we are literally the only hope of life continuing on this planet, as far as we know, onto the universe probably. And if my understanding of life is actually correct with probability, it's far more rare than rare. It's insanely rare. So I do think it's something that's worth preserving and defending. And as the only species on this planet that has the capacity to continue life past Earth, I think that responsibility is really kind of our moral prime directive.
So when you speak about continuity, you're referring to survival, like, in other words, the continuity of the species?
Well, I mean, you could say species, but you could say species serve life. You know what I mean? Like they're just different variations. They're different attempts at continuing that information. So there are different branches of the same mission, which is continuity. So I would say that it's not just species. I would say technically life. As long as the information string continues past Earth, you could say it has succeeded, essentially, in its mission of continuity. So there's that, and I think that's really important. I think with that understanding, we can do a lot of stuff, including world peace, technological progress, stuff like that, which is obvious. But there's a couple other really important implications of continuity. So continuity, in order to ensure continuity, you want to empower yourself. You need to have information. You want to reduce threats, right? It's about reducing threats and increasing ability, about improving strength and reducing weakness. That's what continuity is, a process by which you shed your weakness and strengthen yourself through trial and error. That's basically all it is. And the beauty of this is that over time, right, given enough steps, your weakness will get less and less. And my theory on suffering, which is not, I don't like to call it my theory, I don't like to put names on it, so whatever, just a theory on suffering is really just the delta between your desires and your reality, your dreams and reality. And the power allows you to narrow that gap. So, continuity means getting more power as life gets more power, becomes stronger, more capable. Suffering then therefore would be reduced because you can narrow that gap between your reality and your dreams easier. So there's that, really simple. Of course, there's the Buddhist way to change your dreams to match your reality, but there's the consequence of doing that, to be complacent with the world that you're living in instead of fighting for a better one, is that essentially you're not working towards that continuity prime directive, and essentially following that line of thinking, you would potentially end up extinct. And that's the consequence that I am not okay with.
I am not okay with it either. And I don't know if you've read the Dune books, but they're some of my favorite books, some of the best books ever written, probably. And my favorite one is God Emperor of Dune. And there's two different great God Emperors in fiction: the God Emperor of Warhammer 40,000, the Corpse Emperor, and the Worm Emperor from Dune. And then that's not important, but the Worm Emperor is essentially God, as is the Corpse Emperor. He's essentially like God in the flesh. Like he's omniscient. He can see the future. He knows everything. Like, I mean, he's literally God in the form of a sandworm guy, right? So he exerts his infinite intelligence, and he decides on what he calls the golden path. And the golden path is that thin and specific and fragile chain of causality that does not end in human extinction when essentially an infinite number of ones do, right? So the golden path is essentially, I mean, Jesus said, narrow is the path to damnation or destruction, and many go that way. Or sorry, broad is the path to destruction, and many go that way, but, you know, narrow is the path to salvation. So in other words, there's an infinite number of ways humanity can go extinct. There may, in the end, be only one way that we don't, right? And only a being of such intelligence can see it. So the point I'm making is he essentially agrees with you that of all the possible ways that he could exert his intelligence, like maximum pleasure or maximum power or maximum experience or whatever, he chooses the continuity of the human species as his moral prerogative. So I just point out that your idea is, you know, clearly one shared by Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, who is a pretty cool guy himself. And I generally agree, but the only caveat to that is existence without pleasure or purpose is worse than death. So any form of survival that leads to a quality of life that is sufficiently greater than zero, or I mean lower than zero, it would actually then become preferable to terminate the species were there no way out of that situation, right? So this would be the concept of hell, because of course in hell, in the misguided Christian concept of hell, the one thing you're guaranteed is continuity. That's the only thing you have a guarantee of, is that it will never, ever, ever end, and you will never, ever, ever die. So obviously, continuity itself is not a sufficient moral prerogative, because hell would then be a desirable thing. But we know that hell is a very undesirable thing. In fact, the least desirable thing. So what we need is not only continuity, but continuity with quality of life. And even if we could provide quality of life with only a marginally greater than zero value, that would be sufficient if we could just sustain it indefinitely. But much better than that would be to have it steadily increasing as time went on. So I would argue we would have two moral prerogatives coexisting, one being continuity of life or survival. You could call that the primary one because the other one depends on it. But the other one you could say is the teleological one, the one that gives the first one value and meaning. So in a sense, the higher order value is not continuity, but something else. Could be pleasure, could be self-improvement, could be knowledge, could be happiness, could be quality of life. I would probably say quality of life is the most holistic definition, because that is broad enough to incorporate all the different things that people take pleasure in, such as fitness, sports, education, love. All of that can be qualified as quality of life, which of course can only happen with continuity. But again, continuity without quality of life is worse than death. So I would just say that would be a sufficiently well-rounded moral basis, at least for me, to say, okay, that's our goal. Let's work on that.
Sure. And I would like to touch on the idea that, you know, continuous hell is like horrible, and I agree. It's a horrific idea, and it's actually an insane idea in the sense that there is no change in it. So change plus continuity means that there is eventually hope, no matter what. So as long as there's change, you can endure the hell, essentially. But if you don't, then there is no hope, no chance of success. And as I previously said, the whole idea of continuity, one of the necessary conditions, is strength, really, ability. And as such, you know, the more you acquire ability, the more you acquire power, the less you will suffer. And, you know, so as a consequence of prioritizing continuity is actually increasing the quality of life. So by taking care of continuity, it takes care of you in a weird way. It's really cool, actually. And the beauty of this system that I am proposing is that it's purely mathematical, no fucking opinions. You could literally make an argument and then evaluate it using either using logic evaluation and then Bayes theorem and a bunch of other shit and cross analysis with other ideas. But the point is, once you have a goal, which is survival of all life, not just you, then it's really no longer, just think about it. You have option A, option B, option C, and they all have different values. The option, let's just say C, gives you the highest probability. And obviously in life, we can't know everything. We make inferences. That's how we do things. We always make guesses. The real question is, how educated are those guesses? The less educated they are, the worse it is going to be. The further away you're going to be from acquiring truth or getting a result that's expected, or whatever. Do what you can. I would also like to expand this concept even a little bit further about morality, in the sense that there's a really important thing in morality that we have to consider, and it's actually essential in it, and that is the in-group and out-group concept. Essentially, you have a circle of care, and you have a circle you don't give a fuck about, and everything else is a threat outside. Really, that's basically it. Like if someone, there's no neutral, by the way, as an in-group and out-group. The only neutral is what you don't know. What you don't know is neutral, yes. But once you know something, it's either in-group or out-group. If it's an out-group is a potential threat. Any cause of this is, or the acquisition or assimilation, essentially rise above the other, because the end is one group stand destroyed. Of course, we have sometimes a continuity of not continuity, but we have this kind of states where one group kind of keeps another group down and subjugates them. However, that's a problem. That's the same thing as in-group, out-group, right? When you subjugate another group, you don't give a fuck about their existence, their well-being, or anything. It's only how much you can extract from them. So what actions can you take that's to the benefit of your in-group at the expense of the out-group? So that's the way we go about things, actually. It's the way our brains work. And ideally, you could put everything in your in-group. And the reason why I would suggest put everything in an in-group is that's a wiser way to come up with a decision. And the reason why I say that's wiser is because you're taking more factors into consideration. The more factors you take into consideration, relevant factors, key, is the more accurate your decision is going to be. And I want to be as fucking accurate as possible when I'm dealing with something like this. So there's that. I mean, I can take a break and go on government stuff, but yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think it's worth reiterating what you said before and what I've agreed with, which is that morality, like you said, it's a system of priorities and how we make moral evaluations and considerations. And what I notice and what you notice is there's concentric circles of morality based on who or what you value and extend moral concern to. And I think we both agree that the more morally mature or morally advanced or morally, benevolent or meritocratic that you are, the more on the spectrum of good, the more and broader your circles of concern generally are. And the smaller and more narrow they are, generally speaking, the less moral you are, right? So somebody who only cares about themselves is essentially amoral. They're a narcissist, a sociopath, a predator, something like this. If you care about your family, but nobody else, you might still be considered a good man because you'd be a good father, a good husband, a good family man. But in a sense, you're not really a good man because you never helped your neighbor, you never donated money to Africa, you never went and donated your time as a volunteer to your community. So a better man would check on his neighbor and maybe lend him some sugar. A better man might volunteer for his community fire squadron, and a better man might decide to, serve the government in some important role and make the world better, and so on and so forth. And perhaps the best man or woman would, as you said, care about every blade of grass and every bird and every butterfly and every living thing, and even be thinking about how to someday bring happiness to all of time and space, right? So it seems to me that the goal of moral development would be to extend moral consideration to the widest possible spectrum of beings. But then you run into, as Ahura Mazda, for example, might point out, that it can become pathological to extend compassion or morality to beings that don't deserve it. And even when you talk about continuity, there will be people who need to be executed, legally by the state for crimes. There will be parasitic organisms that need to be eradicated, insects that need to be killed, other alien species may someday need to be wiped out. So I guess where it becomes more interesting, or at least more complicated, is in that it is not only moral to be compassionate, it is sometimes moral to be destructive or violent, right? I'm not a pacifist. I don't know if you are. I don't think so. So perhaps we should talk about that, right? How do we distinguish between, or identify the proper relationship between, morality, like making sure that things continue, and then deciding what things must not continue in order for other things to continue. Like, what do we kill and what do we allow to live,
And I would like to definitely point something out that you said. Absolutely, it's pathological if you just do things without thinking. It has to be intelligent, and you have to go about things by taking factors into consideration. So, obviously you take the subject that you're helping into consideration, everything else into consideration, a potential benefit to society afterwards, all that shit. You just take it all into consideration. The more factors you take in, the better, the more accurate it's going to be, by definition. As for punishment, I'm not a person that believes punishment is really effective, and I'm going to make arguments for that. But it has to really go to the whole in-group, out-group, right? So it's really basic. Let's just say you have a family member that fucked up, somebody you care about though. Instantly, you're thinking, holy shit, can I get that guy in rehab? How can I take care of him? Whatever. But if it's someone that you perceive to be in an out-group, you will instantly want to fucking destroy that person. You're like, oh, fuck that piece of garbage, waste of society, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Let him rot in prison, blah, blah, blah. Who gives a fuck? That attitude of not caring is the problem. Now, I do agree that extending, resources infinitely is also counterproductive on a large scale. So, although I would like to point out that people have a lot of utility, and in actuality, it is our failure as a society to utilize individuals. And I think one reason why people are so full of fucking hate is that when they see people act in horrible ways, it reminds them of their own failure as a society to, make sure some shit like this doesn't come about. And it really reflects on their own failures as well, So, yeah, I think that's one reason why people get very defensive and crazy and fucking evil to the core, and wish harm upon others. I find it weird, since I'm an atheist, and yet I really believe in hate the sin, not the sinner, kind of philosophy, in the sense that I think you should try your best to utilize people and maximize their efficiency, and basically rehabilitate or reprogram, if you want to put it that way. I don't really care how you put it. That's how I would go about this. But then you can go cruel if you want. I'm not cruel, actually. You know what? This is the way kind of to go about it. And I have actually written this down. I know this is probably not correct, and there has to probably be made some alterations to it. But this is the kind of way you could go about kind of calculating what to do. So this is it. If estimated total productivity minus cost of rehabilitation is equal to or greater than total productivity from harvest minus net loss productivity of those close to the harvested, then you go about you go for a harvest actually in that scenario, in the sense that I don't believe in execution. If you're gonna get rid of someone, you fucking harvest them, including their organs, everything. You harvest them. I don't want to waste anything, and that's the way I go about things. I think to waste a human body is fucking insane. It's like millions of dollars worth, I think. And that's yeah. Anyways, with this though, I would like to point out that the estimated total productivity is dependent on the state and its level of technological progress in utilizing that individual. So the more advanced individual the society is, the more ability it has in rehabilitating and increasing the productivity of an individual. So it's good to go towards a more advanced society, which means less people will be incarcerated and more rehabilitation, all that shit. Just it's always making improvements step by step. I would go. We're going to go with yeah. Also, the cost of rehabilitation can be brought down again based on the state of technological progress. All economic progress, all that shit in our society. So really, it is your ability to fix things and your failure to fix things. Like, here's one final thing I would like to say before I stop this train of thought. That is, when you're fighting someone, that's self-defense or whatever, and you use lethal force and the person ends up dead, it's not something to celebrate. It's something to fucking weep over and cry. It's fucking sad. Someone lost their life. It's shit. And if you don't believe in free will, it's even worse, right? Because that person was destined to die at your hands in a very miserable way, probably in some act of desperation. That's not cool. I don't like that. I would weep for that person. However, I would have still done that action. So it's really, you do what you got to do, essentially, but you're not supposed to enjoy it for one. You're not supposed to like it, and you're going to do whatever action you can take in the future to make that less likely to happen. So, for example, if you have a society where people are fucking starving or there's a lot of poverty, and it turns out the person was super fucking hungry and was just, trying to get some food or money for food, or some jewelry from your house that would then be sold for food or whatever for family, pay for their fucking kids or some shit, then the solution would be, that convert that anger that I had from that situation towards making a society whereas that problem no longer exists. That's how I would go about it.
Right. I got stuck on the harvesting organs thing, and you said I wouldn't execute anybody. I'd harvest the organs, I think, and I was just going to point out those two kind of go together. You would execute them, and then you could harvest the organs after.
Yeah, the same thing. What I meant is that I wouldn't just end. Like I'm just saying, if it turns out someone, let's just say it's an ISIS crazy motherfucker, horrible person with zero chance of rehabilitation, so it would be an infinite waste of resources. And it's just unless we're like some fucking advanced alien race where we can just do like a brain reprogramming type lawnmower man thing, reprogram the mind. Until we reach states like that, I think when it comes to people like ISIS, for example, if they were captured, considering they're terrorists, I think this is okay to say. I don't know. I don't really know, but I don't think terrorists get human rights. I don't really give a fuck about rights and all that shit. I think those are bullshit human concepts. But let's say let's just say you captured a horrible terrorist with zero hope. I think there would be a lot more utility if Dr. Cancer Cure goes there and does experiments on this unfortunate mistake and maximize the utility of that poor soul as much as possible. And honestly, I would say this is in many ways the most kindest thing you can do towards someone that is a piece like horrible and miserable person, because you're giving them at least you're making heroes out of them, even though it's not by their choice. You're still giving them a kind of like a very honorable death. I know it's far more than they would deserve, but I hate that term actually, so I'm not going to use that. It seems like it's far more than they would deserve, but to be fair, as I said before, we're not free, and it's when you think about it, it's that person that's actually the loser. To be born as someone that would have a life like that. That person is the real fucking victim in many ways. To be born a piece of shit. and you are actually helping them as much as you can by, if you can't fix it, whatever. Least thing, imagine, that person ends up being there's a sacrifice that leads to a cure that saves millions. I mean, even if that person has, let's just say, they can look back on their life, they would appreciate that. I mean, if they ever get on a level of, whatever. I'm just saying, if there was a possibility to look back, that would be something they would even appreciate. So it's not even inhumane. It's actually quite the opposite. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, again, I'm getting caught sort of on a tangent, but I kind of geek out on social policy stuff. We will open it up for audience participation pretty soon. I just want to say, yes, on the one hand, if you're going to execute 100 people a year, and from those 100 people, you could get, 500 organs, 5 organs per prisoner, and then save 500 lives, then obviously it would be good to save 500 people per year. And wouldn't it be cool if all these serial killers and murderers and rapists were then saving lives of innocent, sick children and stuff? That would be wonderful. So in that regard, that would be great. You could make your amends to society. If you kill 5 kids, you could save 5 kids, and at least some good came out of it. But the only downside is, like you said, each body is worth like $1 million, right? And where there's a demand, there must be a supply. So there are corporations that make huge amounts of money by doing research on organs, etc., or science, or whatever it is. And if they have a supply of these things through executions, the way of human nature and institutions, unfortunately, is that there will be bribery, there will be corruption, and essentially they'll say, well, shit, only 10% as many crimes happened this year as last year, but these corporations were going to give us $10 million for those bodies, and we only have 1 body this year. Maybe we can take some guy from Syria and say that he was an ISIS fighter and kill him and take all his organs, and then we'll make millions of dollars, and they'll make millions of dollars, right? And unfortunately, shit like this happens. It's happened with the circumcision industry, it's happened with the abortion industry, and it would happen with the execution industry. So unfortunately, I would say that despite the waste, state execution must remain only execution. We can't turn it into a for-profit enterprise that serves, corporations and becomes something that will create an incentive to potentially, inflate, right? Because I would suspect if you did this, you would notice the number of executions was suddenly going up every year.
Or, I mean, if you attribute profit to this, that happens. I agree. I would actually argue our economic system, which is a profit-based system, is insane. Actually, it's insane. It is a state of war. Any negotiation, any contract, whatever the fuck it is, it's always a state of war. Whereas you can maximize your gain at the expense of the other, and it's kind of a continuous battle. So there is that, and our economic system also is the epitome of in-group versus out-group. Really, it's literally you versus the world. It's kind of fucked up. That I can get into a little bit later, because I have not finished my work on economics yet. There's still a lot to go through for that one. I don't even know if I'm ever gonna be able to go through most of those. But yeah, there's a lot of problems with that, and I do think that you can compensate for it by just having a robust system, and just don't be open to profits and bribery and shit. Like, make it a hardcore system. And the society that I'm going about is a technocratic society anyway, so bullshit would go out the fucking window instantly. So there's that. But I completely understand your concern, and within our current system, I would completely agree that it's probably too risky to go about this with our current system. I 100% concur. And also, I would like to touch on one other subject before, actually 2 other subjects that's related somewhat to this whole concept, and that is government and morality. Really, how does that work? What is our moral responsibilities, our obligations towards society and ourselves, and how do we balance it, and how do we balance the whole thing? And well, I was thinking about this for a long time. This is an idea that has been, kind of in the back of my head, and over months it has been changing, and adding to it a little bit here and there. And my goal usually is to go for a most simple system, because simple things allow you to build complicated and amazing things. If you have simple building blocks, you can make more complicated things. The more complicated your building blocks is, the less complex things you can build with it. So the more, like for example, with ones and zeros being the most simplest things, you can create the most complex things. It's very interesting how that works. But yeah, so this whole government system that I was going to go about is a system of maximum democracy tempered with the highest quality control. So what do I mean by maximum democracy? Everybody, literally every fucking schmuck gets a voice. However, you're tempered, that voice is tempered with quality control. How would that work exactly? So this goes back to the idea that I was going with, like a tournament of ideas. So let's say there's a topic, vaccines, for example, or something like that, and you get a bunch of people. Anyone can say anything they want when it comes to the arena. There has to be obviously technology has to be utilized, most likely, to be able to go through massive amounts of data when it comes to total democracy, in the sense that total tempered democracy, because there's millions of people, can't go through everyone for everything. And I would say it has to be based on every single topic. So it's kind of like a policy. So it's a maximum democracy policy system, whereas for every single topic, for every single policy, you would have a kind of a tournament of ideas where people flesh their ideas out, and the one that is the most cogent will win. And that's really it. It's like a tournament. The more participants, the more higher chance of having a better answer eventually. But it's kind of like the thing on the US dollar where it says e pluribus unum, one out of many. I do think that is what government really is, the essence. A way of looking at it is like being on a ship. You can have 1,000 people on a ship, but a ship can only go one direction. Okay, you can't have people going different directions. You gotta fucking have a method by which you decide which direction you're gonna go. My methodology would be that which allows the ship to continue roaming for as long as possible, which is continuity. But I also pointed out that the beauty of continuity is that it has the perks of reducing suffering and a bunch of other awesome stuff like expanding knowledge, because it's a necessity of survival to gather information and become stronger. So yeah, that was it.
Okay, so I think we've covered some good ground already. I don't want to keep the audience out of the conversation any longer. So if the audience wishes to participate, anyone is encouraged to ask a question or make a comment. If that doesn't happen, I'll simply continue the discussion. But does anyone have something they'd like to ask or say to Hermes or myself?
Yeah, I got something to touch on. Hi, my name's Kevin. So when we're talking about morality, and you're talking about the continuation of the species or a species type thingy of being the core fundamental aspect of what drives morality, basically, basically I agree with that. But so like my perspective, at least on what is defined as moral versus amoral, and the good versus bad type thingy, kind of touch on what you said near the end, that you boil things down to the simplest building blocks to be able to build these amazing elaborate constructions. So with morality, you want to boil it down to the most basic definitions to be able to have a concise way to go forward. For me, my definition is life versus death, kind of like you said. If someone has to die, that should be a weeping event that should be taken not lightheartedly. So with me, what defined as a moral action is something that continues it, but where where conflict comes into play, where misconstruing comes into play, is going on with what you said about government, is who is to dictate what is moral versus amoral, and who has to follow that guideline of moral versus amoral, because morality is a personal choice. Once you start to impose your morality onto other people, that's where it becomes more amoral. When as an example of drug use, certain people think it's immoral for a drug user to use drugs because, oh, you're going to die, you're killing yourself, blah, blah, blah. But in my opinion, it's immoral to be able to dictate what someone can and cannot do with their own body. But on the flip side, if you have to rob and steal and con and hustle to get your money to get your dope, yeah, then that becomes a immoral action for, a life choice, blah, blah, blah. So basically for me, morality boils down to if you're able to live a longer, happier life personally, and then once you're able to do that, if everybody did that, we'd live in a happy society, because everyone would take care of himself to the point of not needing to worry about other people's shit. But in our society now, it's already gotten to the point where you need to kind of go to your neighbor and see if they're fucking all right and have a cup of sugar type thing. And so that's not inherently human nature. What we're facing now and what we're seeing now with human nature is a byproduct of the way things have been for so long. And as Shogun kind of mentioned, I think you mentioned it here, or maybe before, about sometimes things need to die and, and blah, 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 to be reborn and to be able to continue things going forward. So everything's a byproduct of now. And with that, if we want to see a actual dramatical change that will continue the human species and Earth to be able to live a long, fulfilling life, we need a radical change, basically. I don't know if it's burning everything down. I don't know what it is. We need a radical change because we're on the first steps going forward because of the internet. Now we can firsthand see the suffering, the immorality, the backwardsness of the world firsthand with our own eyes. No longer are we construed to what the government tells us or what the notebooks tell us or what the newspaper tells us. I'm not saying that is the perfect solution and we're without fault because of it, because of trolls, because of fake news. With your idea of a technocratic society based on I don't know the full definition of technocratic society, but I think it's got to do with something with technology and technology being the fundamental core principle of stuff. So with technology and technocratic advancements of a society forward, with great power comes great responsibility. To talk about, the idea of technology, I'll mention Foucault and the idea of the elliptical prison sentence elliptical prison where, if the prison guard can see the prisoners 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it dramatically changes their characteristical output of what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. That's based on fear. And so that's, in my opinion, immoral. To just like terrorists rule their day by fear, by having people not know what's going to happen next, blah, blah, blah. Just like, modern day governments. Every time I'm driving down the road and I see a police car, it's, oh shit, I got to slow down. Am I doing something wrong? Blah, blah, blah. I don't do anything wrong. I'm just going down the street. But it's, that's my piece.
Sure, I would like to respond to many points that you made. First, I would like to address the last one that you made on fear and terror. I do believe fear or terror or anything other than reason really is a failure of reason, violence being the worst failure of reason, because it erases the possibility of reason in the future, or at least makes it more difficult. So it's like legit the worst alternative to reason. It is. All it does, violence, is highlights your own weakness and your own ability to achieve a desired result through reason. It's the mark of a weak person. So there's that. But I would also like to go into the whole government thing a little bit more further, the whole drugs and all that shit. So your freedom really goes so far as long as you're not bound or connected to others. So the more interconnected you are, the more you're, affecting others, the more your quote unquote freedom is limited, because then you're stepping into other people's freedom, and there's just like a saying, I don't know, your freedom ends where mine begins or some shit like that. So in the system that I am proposing is that while, everyone on the ship has to go in one direction. Within the ship, there is local movement that they can have in their own, respective areas where they can do whatever the fuck they want. I don't care. See, the point is that whereas two or more people interacting, there is that is when you can apply the whole morality, the whole concept. Actually, you can apply it to yourself as well, in the sense that being a drug addict it would be an immoral thing. Essentially, you're wasting your utility and are basically not being as productive of a member of society as possible. And it's kind of a fucked up thing to do. But I would say, since it's like that's your local boundaries, you can do that if you want. I would think I don't have the right to tell you can't do that. Because if I were, like, let's just say I were. So there was a couple things I can do as a society in a situation like that. Let's say there's someone's a drug addict. Obviously, you would never go for them illegally or want to harm them or put them in jail. That's insane. Okay. But you would like to perhaps, treat it as a medical condition and get them rehab or whatever and help them that way. I do think that is kind of society's responsibility in that sense, to find and to help people recover. I also think it is a responsibility of the person that is being helped to want to recover and be a productive member of society and move past their failings. I think that's the way to go about it. Also, yeah, the system of government that I was proposing does not have politicians. That's one of the beautiful things. And it's kind of like neurons, really. You have dendrites and you have axons, a lot of little inputs, and there's one action potential and one signal that just gets kicked out. It's multiple inputs, one output. That's the idea. E pluribus unum, quite literally. I do also wanted to point out something else. Radical change. You pointed out radical change, like burning shit down. Right, I understand the emotion completely, but I would agree that's the potentially the worst way to go about it. As I was saying, violence, doesn't really do much. In fact, it usually makes things worse. So if you do want to create radical change, just like I do, I would go about it in a different way, which is with reason. I know. I know that how much more powerful reason and ideas are than bullets and violence. In fact, there are different battlefields where we can all fight for change. And I do think fighting for change is our nature. We fight for change, for our dreams. Reality is whatever the fuck it is, and our dreams is different from it. And we're fighting to change reality or destroy the current state of it to match the new state. So we're always in a state of war, essentially, with reality. I would say that I can't believe I just had a brain fart. Oh, I had such a horrible time.
I just want to say I agree. I'm also nonviolent too. I don't think violence is any answer to the problem.
I remembered it though. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks. It's the brain. So there's different battlefields. The mind is the ultimate battlefield. Okay, so I know that I'm far more deadly than the U.S. military. Literally, I know that. I fight in the battlefield of ideology and ideas. It's the highest battlefield you can fight in, and that's really, I could say, the realm of gods and kings. Everyone else follows that ideology. The ideology is your core programming. You're a slave to your ideas and your dreams, and I'm the one that's making those dreams, or shaping them. So if you want to create change, you got to go at the core source, the programming. And I would say revolution of the mind is far more effective than a revolution of physical violence. In fact, I would say a revolution of the mind is the only way to create true revolution.
Well said.
So does anyone else have a question or a comment or something they'd like to say? Okay, so Hermes, is there any other directions that you wanted to go or any other areas you wanted to build onto in this episode?
there's one final thing, that the failure part where I'm working on currently. There's two parts, but I don't want to get to the second part. The current failure part is me not having a direct link between a selfish reason for being moral. So as I explained, there are logical reasons when you look at the whole picture as to why we should act certain ways. But is there a selfish reason, like an actual selfish reason that can also play? And where I do think there is, because as you know, I believe in continuity, like being the nature of reality, whereas it implies that you will eventually return back to the point that you're at right now, given enough steps, given all steps minus one. No, given all steps, literally you would have to do every other step in existence to get back to where you are. But that's continuity, which is really weird and crazy. But it also implies that eventually you will change and be continuous and become another person and so on and so forth. And kind of, I'm not sure exactly. That's where I'm kind of like drawing. But if we're all one, right, then there is a selfish reason why to treat others better. So that is also like another part where I'm going to go with where I'm trying to find an answer. But really, this is really difficult because to get this answer, I would really need to understand the nature of consciousness, exactly what happens during death, and what could potentially happen afterwards. I do believe that death is a shitty experience, whereas you're literally experiencing destruction of the self, your memories, your cherished dreams, everything. I think it sucks. And I do think that kind of what we're doing really is that we're passing on our dreams and whatever the fuck we can to the future because we're too weak to fix the problem of death at the moment. And that's it. I can go further on. I'm going to have a couple more of these events.
Just one thing, as you were saying at the end, you're like, same with me. Death is the ultimate. I don't even like debating people over death because people will try and put stuff forward. I'm like, you don't know. You're not dead. I'm not dead. We'll never have an answer, and that's why there's religion and this and that. But one little, like, my father recently passed away, so I'm kind of semi close to death, and like, I'm coping, I'm fine, But so in my childhood, when I used to lay in bed and close my eyes and being like, oh, this is going to be death, blackness for all eternity, blah, blah, blah. That freaked me out, and I started doing research and So one thing that gives me solace, that kind of keeps me going, is so when you go to sleep, I only say this because you mentioned dreams and sleeping. So when you sleep, your brain releases DMT through your pineal gland. I know you guys know this. You've probably heard this a million times, but blah, blah, blah. It releases X amount of DMT when you're sleeping, but when you die, it releases 10,000 times more than you would normally have in a normal sleep state. So that's where a lot of philosophers and theorizers, whatever, that's why they say, you see a bright blinding light or blah, 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 this and that. So like, I think when you die, you kind of go into that final stage. You have that big amount of DMT. You go into your dream state, which is, dreams you can't control. You can either have a nightmare or a really great fucking dream. So basically, dreams are a collection of your subconscious and your blah, blah, blah. So when you die, you just have a really, really intense dream. And if you have a nightmare because you were a shitty person your whole life, you live in your hell in your afterlife. So like, I just think the afterlife is a big dream, or I kind of believe in reincarnation. No proof, but I'm kind of glad you touched on, because that goes exactly with morality. It's life or death. It's because it's so scary, we try and put these moral checks and balances to stop people from facing the great abyss, the great blackness, the big rest, the big sleep.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah, I don't know if there is ever a eternal, death, because as I've you weren't there during the previous one, but I was implying how continuity, like, and I know this is a different continuity. I was talking about continuity in terms of survival, but I'm talking about the nature of existence, where there's a flow, there's change. Change is a constant. If that is true, if there is a flow always, then it kind of implies that you are everything, and eventually, given enough steps, you will become every other permutation of existence.
Oh yeah.
So you're one permutation, and you will become every other permutation given enough steps. That would give you a selfish reason to be kind towards others, because for all you know, that other person would eventually be you, given enough steps. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no freaking clue, and this is a part where I would have to work hard, probably talk to other people that have worked on this. Yeah, it'll be cool though. It'll be cool if we can create a clear, selfish reason for morality that could convince even a psychopath on paper how to behave, and that doesn't involve the use of force.
My kind of theory, like, so I spent time on the streets where I've seen the whole spectrum of mental illness and mental greatness. I've seen geniuses who've been ignored by society and left to rot because they weren't commercially viable, or they weren't socially acceptable for this or that other reason. And so you would first, you don't want to look at how to soothe a psychopath. Ultimately, if you're, I don't know if it's, yeah, you don't want to learn how to soothe one. You want to learn how to not create one. And how you not create one is kind of like you were talking about, I don't know if it was about, kind of going back to Foucault and always being under surveillance. So how you prevent a psychopath is, it's simply you just nurture a well-rounded child. You give him love and food, and you don't make him scared for his life or his necessities. This is that example is a non-organic example. That's a societal constructed psychopath. From the birth, he had all the right genes to be a normal, well-rounded person. Something triggered him, and then he went down that path. That's a different way to look at it than a organic mental illness, someone who has, say, fetal alcohol syndrome or this or that. Organic ailments for psychopathy is, so that solution is different compared to a social constructed psychopath. Psychopathy is basically repressed emotions of anger, neglect, trauma. Basically, it's like psychopathy is a reaction, or is a outlet of trauma, basically. And I say trauma as an umbrella term because mommy didn't say she loved me enough can be traumatic to one person, but then, or person A, and person B, daddy beat the shit out of me every single day until I was 20. Both traumatic, but one having person B who got beaten every day, he can still grow up and be a total normal person and have no violent tendencies. So with social constructed psychopathy, you have to teach that mental child that the world isn't a hateful place. It's the question, everyone modern times is how do we do it? Because, oh, I have to go to work now. Oh, I'm too busy. I have to raise my kids. Everyone else is too busy taking care of their own shit. But in my opinion, they're not genuinely taking care of their shit. They're going to a job. They're making money for someone else. They come home, they're tired, and it's never the fault of the mother or father who's so overworked that they can't raise their child. It's not inherently their fault. It's, in my opinion, the immoral system that we have set up now, that if you don't go to work if you don't do that 9 to 5, we'll take your child away because you can't take care of them enough. And it's a really nuanced, dance to do with everything, because it's nature versus nurture. It's, so it's, the solution isn't how do we treat them, it's how do we prevent them. because kind of like you guys talked about before, some people are so beyond a point that you kind of just got to put a bullet in their head because there's no redeeming qualities. I don't really follow that kind of train of thought. I believe in bad choices, not bad people, but characteristical bad choices. Yeah, you're statistically more likely to do X, Y, or Z. You're right, but that's deterministic. And when you're predetermined to be X, Y, or Z, not everyone, but most likely you'll act like X, Y, or Z. And that's where, people these days argue, it's, oh, why do you do drugs? Where do these people come from? And da-da-da-da. With the capitalist society in the West we have now, like I'm in Canada, but so as we're kind of set up in the West, it's based on capital. My grandfather's in a retirement home during the pandemic, and when I first came back after getting sober, I went to go take care of him because his 8 children were too busy working and doing their own shit. So I went there to do it, and then I kept being like making suggestions of things we can do, but every time I suggested something, it was, we pay them to take care of him, so we don't, so he's fine, don't worry about him. Our society is programmed to the point of, you don't want to do something or you don't want to think about something, you pay someone else to do it for you. You're depressed, I'll pay a psychologist to tell me what's wrong with me by no fault of your own. Again, because 90% of everybody is too busy. Like, we've been worked into the ground to the point where we're all depressed and suicidal and need medications and need a drink and need all of this escapism, all this escapism basically. And then meanwhile, like, I'm not saying that's bad. Escapism is a fundamental element of human nature, mainly because we are higher thinking beings, because we can think about, oh, I might die tomorrow. That's our problem. That's why you'll always hear, you think too much, just shut the fuck up and just start living life. You'll be so much happier. It's funny because it's true, kind of, but it's, yeah.
So at this point, I think it would be, that's good reflection. I think it's a good time to ask Hermes 2 questions. The first would be, again, are there any other topics you want to expound on, develop, or interrogate today? Because we'll hopefully do an ongoing series. We did our debate on Christianity, podcast on atheism. You had a debate with Jigmo about, I guess, religion. And now we had this one on morality. So we'll have time to flesh out more ideas. But is there anything else that you wanted to cover today?
I could have made a response. Actually,
if you want to respond to what he said, by all means, feel free.
Yeah.
I just was trying to, develop, or at least give you the opportunity to develop it in the way that,
Sure.
wanted to. But if you would like to respond, by all means, go ahead.
Sure. I just want to point a few things out. One is escapism, which I do agree it is unfortunately human nature. However, the problem with it, there's 2 types of dealing with anxiety or whatever issues. There is problem-focused coping and there's emotion-focused coping. And escapism is emotion-focused coping, whereas you're not dealing with the problem, but you're just dealing with the emotion, the discomfort. And the problem with this is that escapism doesn't solve the problem and gives the illusion that the problem is not there. But the consequences of the problem remains, which is fucked. You don't want that. And that's why escapism, the more and more you do it, it's like procrastinating or whatever, all of these things. At the end of the day, you're going to be in a worse position afterwards. So I do understand it's something that we all do. I do it probably more than anyone else here. So I'm being a hypocrite if I would pretend that I'm not. But it's not something to cherish or it's something to actively move against if you can. As for the society destroying thing, sorry, not destroying. Actually, it is in a sense because you're destroying the current state of it to a better state. But the whole idea that telling someone that the world is not cruel, I would never do that to someone. I would actually tell them the world is fucking cruel. The world is horrific. Expect hell. And I would also tell them that, this world will probably shit on you as hard as possible. And the way to shit on it back harder is to fix it and not be part of the problem and be a piece of shit yourself. That's the real way to destroy the world that fucked you over, by fixing it. And I'm done.
Okay. Well, that's great. And thank you. And so again, I guess we'll ask the audience one more time. Is there anyone who has a desire to ask a question or make a comment about morality or what we've discussed?
I have lots to talk about morality, but I might trigger him.
Well, it's up to you. I don't know how much the conversation you heard, but if you did at least hear some of it, I guess even if you didn't, you're more than welcome to bring up what you had on your mind.
So there's a common discussion about morality, right? I don't know if you talked about it, how you can't have morality without God's morality, and then the atheist's view on morality. But what happens when we bring in alien morality? How do we discuss what another being feels morally anything? And this is if you believe in them, and that's fine if you don't and you don't want to talk about it. But if you know that they're out there, what do you think this quote, higher intelligence's morality, would model itself after in order to interact with you?
So you missed out the key points, but I'm going to point it out anyway. So my system, which is the continuity of life, that one actually accounts for aliens as well if they exist. So that's the cool part. even if they do or don't, whatever, it still accounts for it. So the system that I have actually addresses that if it turns out to be the case. In addition, I do believe that, to be wise and intelligent would kind of mean that you're gonna basically be good in many ways, because wisdom and goodness, I think, go hand in hand, because selfishness, narrow-mindedness, and all that fucked up shit leads to the in-group, versus the out-group kind of attitude, whereas you want to just fuck everyone over, and there's no really long-term sight or vision or anything. It's usually a very small-minded state. Evil is just like misfiring of neurons. It's like friction. I don't even think of it as like an evil thing. I just really think of it as inefficiency. So I would doubt that an intelligent species would be unwise and cruel.
Well, but say we have a morality clause built up and defined even in your mindset, and say your mindset's the way to go. What happens when another species comes and says, no, this is what we have, this is what you need to have, because we say this is the best way for the galaxy?
Right. Well, the cool thing about the system that I implemented is that regardless of the power of anyone else, you still go about going towards the action that leads towards the highest percentage of continuity of life. So if it turns out, here's a weird example. Some crazy motherfucker, alien, is holding you hostage and torturing you. Okay, but that asshole is going to go and torture some other motherfucker. But in order to do that, he needs your energy, okay, to continue absorbing your whatever essence till he reaches the next alien or whatever, the next host. I would say it is your responsibility in that situation actually to end your life. Why? Because that action would cause the monster the harm, which would prevent that monster from harming another person, which would be the action that would cause the least harm total. Yeah. So it's clear, really. You just have to get as much info. So the system, the way it works, the way I have, is something that you can feed into a machine. That was the whole purpose behind it. I wanted to, the thought experiment that I was having initially for all of this was, how do you teach a machine to be moral? I do believe I have the script for it. Maybe not, but I think it is. I don't know. But yeah, it's totally objective. It's not opinions or anything like that.
And the reason why I bring it up is there's a concept on Earth called exopolitics, and this is extraterrestrial politics. It's being discussed in many avenues, and whether the Congress and Senate's been briefed on the UFO phenomena, so at the same time they have to factor in exopolitics, regardless if you don't think they do or not, they are. So morality comes into play in our system of law and order on Earth. So as it exists on Earth, our framework of a society is codified in a social construct that we define as moral, like laws. Laws are moral. There's God's laws, and then there's laws of the land, and what is a sentient sovereign being on a planet ruled by? Well, these beings that we're being ruled by are contemplating exopolitics, so they must also be contemplating morality of out there. And so I was just, I was kind of just bringing it up as a closing point in the discussion, I suppose. I heard some of it while I was walking, but
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's, if you want to respond, Hermes, go ahead. Otherwise,
No. Actually, I think it's a good time to end because, I think it's better, NSA, if you just listen to the first half or whatever, and then ask me the question again because I didn't get a lot of details.
So generally speaking, you shouldn't really interview or join into an event if you didn't listen to the first half, because the way it goes, the first part's an interview and the second part is essentially an ask me anything about the interview. So if you didn't hear the first half, it's kind of disorienting if you start weighing in without the context. But that said, what you said is totally fine. But I do want to coalesce what we said by just asking Hermes, like, where are you going to go from here? In terms of, if you continue to think about this topic, like of morality, like what would be your next steps of investigating it?
The next step really right now is neuroscience and consciousness. I want to figure out where the correlation between matter and consciousness goes, which there is. Obviously, there's a one-to-one correlation that you can prove this. The question is what, where, how? Is it like an electron configuration? Are there paired electrons that somehow, if you're a singularity, then is it a single point that's conscious, that's infinitely high resolution that creates? I don't know. There's so many weird shit out there. So sorry about the heated response. I really don't know yet, but I'm gonna try.
Okay. Well, this was helpful and good, and we could honestly have an ongoing series on ethics and morality. It's been a common topic in the voice chats and one that I have thought about a lot. And I don't really think we got into as much of it as we could have today, although I'm quite happy with what we covered. So we could definitely do a part 2 on ethics, but what would you like to do if we do another event in the future between yourself and myself and the server, given that we have done a series and have talked about others? So what would you think you'd like to do next?
I was thinking one subject that I might do, and this is something that I was planning on doing, is a rediscovery of numbers and math, from scratch. I want to create maybe a present. Yeah, this one has to be a presentation. Whereas it's an attempt at trying to re-understand math concept of numbers, everything from scratch. And I have been working on that, and I have found some really, really cool some information, some cool patterns, some weird shit in pi. Actually, pi is, I would say, the number that contains all the information in existence, because it's infinitely high resolution. It's an iterative number, whereas every step increases the resolution and add information to it and ad infinitum. Pi is some fucking crazy shit, and it's a big part of understanding reality. I would say math and philosophy are the way to go about if you really want to understand what the fuck you're doing in this world and what your purpose is and what the hell is happening. So I might probably do a presentation on that.
Well, that would be of great benefit to myself personally, because as you probably know, I have developed into a 33-year-old man who literally cannot do basic division, multiplication, subtraction. My understanding of numbers is that I can count from 1 to 100 and extrapolate to the thousands. I can basically count. That's the extent of my mathematical ability. And I've compensated for that by having extremely abnormally developed abilities in other areas, like social skills and language skills. But I'm completely math. I am not highly regarded for my math skills, let me put it that way. So that would be helpful for me personally, and also interesting. So we should do that. So we'll plan that for the next event. You can let me know when and send me the artwork you want used as usual. That being said, thank you for another great discussion. Thank you, NSA. Thank you, Caviggear, and everyone else who attended or participated. I will remind you that this podcast, like all our other podcasts, can be heard on YouTube and BitChute and Podbean. And you can find all of those in the hashtag RT Podcast channel of the Roundtable Discord server, where we record the podcast every day at 8 p.m. Central. And so I have now concluded my usual outro. So I will not ask you for a final statement, as that would disrupt the normal format. However, thank you again. Thank you, everybody. And let's jump up to Roundtable 1, and you'll find this uploaded very soon. Thank you very much. God bless. See you tomorrow.